Hi, this is Benoy, your host of the Solar Maverick Podcast. Are you a solar developer that is ready to make a real difference? Then you need to hear about the Department of Energy's American-made Community Power Accelerator Prize. That's right, we're talking 25 teams will get up to $400,000 each in cash awards to help develop community benefiting solar projects. Think community solar projects, resilient microgrids, behind-the-meter IPPs, and even multi-family commercial industrial projects that empower neighborhoods. Round 3 of this competition is open to new and expanding solar developers and community organizations that have a portfolio of 2 or more distributed solar projects that meet the prize criteria. This is your chance. But hurry, the deadline's December 17th. Reach out to Jade Garrett with Positive Deviancy, a power connector for the American-made challenges, to get free support to apply. We'll have more about this on the notes of the podcast. You could also email Jade. Her email is jade, Jade, at positivedeviancy.com. positivedeviancy.com, and that's her website as well, www.positivedeviancy.com, positivedeviancy.com. Thank you. Hi, this is Benoy, your host of the Solar Maverick Podcast. I wanted to invite you to an event that we're having on Wednesday, December 4th from 6 to 10 p.m. at Hudson Hall in Jersey City, New Jersey. It's our winter solstice fundraiser. Join Reneu Energy, Positive Deviancy, and the Solar Maverick Podcast. We will be also raising funds for the Let's Share the Sun Foundation, which we've had twice on the Solar Maverick Podcast, which aids improvised communities in harnessing solar energy. If you're interested in sponsoring the event, please feel free to reach out to us at info@reneuenergy.com. That's info@reneuenergy.com. If you want more information on this event, we'll have it on the notes of the podcast, and I hope to see you there. Thanks for listening.
In terms of markets and utility changes, utility backlog, all of the things that slow down a developer and IPP, you have to be nimble. You have to have different market expertise. You have to be diversified, and you got to place some bets that aren't going to pay off immediately and try and get a longer term extension on those options. So if the market does come around, you're in a position to succeed in different spaces.
Hello and welcome to the Solar Maverick Podcast, where solar meets entrepreneurship and experience. I'm your host, Benoy Thanjan, so let's get into it. Hi, this is Benoy, your host of the Solar Maverick Podcast. I'm really excited to have on this episode of the podcast, Jared Haines. He's the CEO/COO of Catalyze. And Jared has over 20 years of senior leadership experience before being at Catalyze. And Jared, welcome to the podcast. I'm really excited to have you. You're a solar maverick, and I'm excited to speak to you because I think you could provide a lot of great perspective with the many years that you've been in the industry. So I really appreciate the time that you're making.
No problem. I'm excited to be here too. Thanks, Benoy.
Anytime. And Jared, it would be great if you could talk about like your role at Catalyze, and if you could talk about the company as well, if people are not familiar with Catalyze.
Sure. Would it be helpful for you to hear a little bit about my history, or would you want to just move right into Catalyze?
I think it would be great actually to go into your history. You probably don't remember, Jared. We met like 14 years ago when I was at Vanguard Energy Partners, and obviously started Mercury Solar at that time. I think we met at a PSC&G or happy hour. So for me, it'd be actually really interesting to hear like how you got into the solar industry and then your progression to get to Catalyze. And I think our audience, who we call Mavericks, would be definitely interested. And it's been an amazing journey for me watching as an outsider. So that would be great if you could do that.
Sure. I actually started with a friend of mine who was a local electrician in North Shore, New York. And he had about 40 electricians on staff. And he kept losing electricians in his team to people in California that were hiring away electricians out of the New York area to go to California to work for solar companies. So he was like, what's going on? I need to figure this out. So he did a little investigation, figured out where the team was going. And he and I were golfing buddies. And he's like, hey, I want to start a solar company. You want to start a solar company with me? And I said, I don't know anything about solar. I don't even know how to read my own electric bill. So he said, well, so what? You can sell anything. I'd love to have you come on the team and two of us could start the company and see where it goes. We could sell solar to all of my electrical customers. He had like 200 commercial accounts and 2,000 residential accounts that he had, in the local area. And then basically did a bunch of research, figured out, this is not a terrible idea. We were a little ahead of the game in New York back in 2005, but there were some great incentives in place, $4 a watt incentives from NYSERDA, and basically zero interest loans through Citibank, through NYSERDA. So you could get the tax credits back then as well, both federal and state. So all in all, if you can be a commercial account with the depreciation included, you were getting a zero interest loan and getting money back in your pocket for doing a $7 a watt installation. So I was like, you know what? I could sell this. So I went to about 20 of his accounts that you could put a 50 kilowatt system on, sold the first 15 projects in the first 6 months. And it took us about 6 months to ramp up. And then after that, we never looked back. We never had sales, in any given month under what our SG&A was, and we were making money. We then just continued to grow. We took some outside capital in, and we acquired 3 more companies, one in Philly, one in South Jersey, and one in Mass. And we wound up ultimately selling the company in 2013 to a publicly traded company out of Colorado. And, it was a pretty nice success story. When we reached our peak, we did about 100 million in annual revenue, and we had 285 employees, and we had 85 trucks. Mercury Solar is probably the largest EPC contractor in the New York metro area, doing a lot of business in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, and a little bit Long Island back then. Long Island was participating in some of the NYSERDA rebates at that point. That was the start of my career, and I learned everything there is to learn about commercial and residential installations. Then I left Mercury, went to work for NextEra, and that's where I got a little bit more background in understanding being an IPP, modeling project ownership, looking at O&M, looking at energy storage, looking at wind, LMP pricing at hubs, doing some of the small to medium utility scale projects. And that rounded out sort of my solar background. And then I was recruited away and went to work for a company called Novus Renewables, which was a joint effort between Eni and Falk Renewables out of Milan. And they started an operation here in the US. So helped them grow for a few years and got that to about 200 megawatts of operational assets and 35 or so employees. And then they made the decision to just stick with utility scale only. So I was more a DG guy growing up, and I like to see those assets sort of from beginning to end and happen within 12 to 18 months. So I left, started doing my own development work again. And then my company got acquired by Catalyze. And over the first 24 months, brought in a lot of projects through development friends, partners for Catalyze. And then ultimately, board decided that I was in a better position to help the company grow because I have a lot of operational experience throughout the whole life cycle. So I understand the sales aspect and the development aspect and the EPC aspect and managing the assets and the legal parts that go along with each of those, as well as really understanding the finance. So I could get into a project model and change assumptions and see what's impactful to the returns for a project, and then how to raise capital. So understanding the tax equity along with the construction financing and back leverage for projects is also important. So knowing all those components and being a true operational leader and helping the company get more efficient throughout their processes over the last 18 months has been really helpful for me and for the company. So that's a little background of my history.
I mean, that's amazing background. And it's just too really interesting to hear like the growth from Mercury, right? And then to NextEra, to Falk, to then, basically Catalyze. If our audience isn't familiar, can you go into more formally, like what is Catalyze like focused on?
Yeah, sure. So Catalyze is a solar IPP. So our focus is community solar and C&I customers, commercial and industrial customers. So the C&I customers typically tend to be PPAs, where you do a power purchase agreement, where you put the solar on site and deliver power to the tenant in the building or on that property. And then the community solar projects are either on the ground or on rooftops or parking garages or parking lots in general. And then you tie in front of the meter and you're selling that power back to the utility by way of signing up community solar subscribers along the way, that they get offered a benefit and a discount on their utility rate in order to subscribe and support the industry and the growth that we need, within the solar space. So between the community solar and C&I customers, we've got over 100 megawatts operational. We've got 200 megawatts that are going on right now in terms of construction. Then we have 400 megawatts in development that should allow us to install another 200 megawatts throughout 2025, and then maybe another 250 into 2026. And I think one of the unique things about Catalyze, we do have our own sales team. So we've got a sales leader with senior sales folks that are out there talking to C&I accounts and CFOs and sustainability directors, et cetera, to help them make decisions to put solar on site. And then we've got a land origination team that goes out, talks to farmers and landowners to generate community solar opportunities. And we've got a development team that carries that through to the EPC team and then all the way to asset management. So we are sort of a full service. We're not just acquiring projects solely from other developers. We're trying to understand the markets and build a relationship with landowners and C&I customers from the beginning, which I do think differentiates us from quite a few people, because a developer is going to flip that project to an IPP, and the IPP doesn't have that original relationship that's been built with the landowner or C&I customer. So I think people appreciate that transparency from the beginning. We're going to stick with them for 25, 35 years.
Yeah, that is really huge as an IPP, because you don't really have investors that have that development sort of experience, and then the EPC and the asset management, it's very hard to find. Can you talk about maybe other ways that Catalyze is different from other IPPs?
So there are a lot of great IPPs out in the marketplace. So I think a lot of it is the interaction you have with the staff and the people. We've got a 110 person company with a lot of experience in each department. We've got very specific expertise that we can lend to any question that gets asked by a customer, whether that's C&I or community solar. And we're very flexible, small, still have entrepreneurial spirit, and we can make changes in dynamic and make things happen very quickly. We can get contracts done within days as opposed to months. We could turn around pricing within 24 hours as well. So I think just being that responsive, knowledgeable partner for long-term strategy is what differentiates us from some of the other folks that we compete against.
Oh, I totally agree. I think that's huge that you're able to respond really quickly. And then pricing, which is something that obviously other developers who potentially are selling projects would like quick turnaround and to execute pretty quickly, which is amazing. Can you talk about like your pricing software, like Re-Energize software? I know I've seen the product and it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, sure. So Re-Energize is a software tool that we built internally, and it's not necessarily a pricing tool. It feeds into the pricing, but it is more of an opportunity to go find new sites. So it's a multi-level GIS system that is integrated with Salesforce.com in our back office system. And it allows us to find a location, layer on the utility maps, layer on the information for the homeowner, their home address, layer on zoning information, layer on floodplain information, and contour maps, all kinds of things. So basically, you can put a site into the system and you can very quickly get as much information as you need to determine whether it's a good site for solar or not, whether that's a rooftop or a piece of land. And even on the flip side, so people call in and ask for those types of assessments. We could do it on the phone in 5 minutes. So you're like, yeah, your site's no good. Where back in the day, that used to take 2 days and lots of effort. So the flip side of that is our land origination team, they can go and put in an area that they want and say, okay, I want to look at Rochester Gas and Electric, and I want to look at just that one utility. Or they could just say, I want to look at areas, 60-mile radius of Rochester, even if it's in 3 different utilities, and I want 50-acre parcels of land, and I want no trees, and I want contours under this size, and I want to be within 10th of a mile of a substation or one of the utility lines that allow for a 5 megawatt interconnect. And we can pull that information out of the system, create a list of the people, create a mail campaign, and send mailers out to those 50 people, 80 people, whatever we get out of the system, and create opportunities and do that city by city as you go around the upstate New York, for example, and uncover opportunities to go to find new landowners and sign them up with lease options to develop a solar project.
Yeah, that is really impressive. And that's huge to be able to turn around that sort of information pretty quickly. So congrats, because I can't even imagine how much work from a software development and having all the different teams to review. That's pretty amazing. Can you talk about like what markets or what states that you're primarily focused on when it comes to like owning assets?
Sure. I mean, it's most of the Northeast states have been in and out of solar, over the last 10 years. We've got projects in most of them, but I would say the focus is New York. We hope Massachusetts kind of gets out of their utility study grind that they're in, because there is a good program there. And then New Jersey with their community solar program is growing, and we've got a lot of expertise there. Maryland, we've got a couple different projects that we're looking at in Maryland and we're building in Maryland. Illinois, as you go across the country, is probably the best in the Midwest right now. And then California is certainly an area of focus for us. Hopefully California figures out how to get community solar correctly rolled out and adopted, because it's just a great opportunity for the state to go faster and reach their goals. And then Texas is the only one I didn't mention that we do have some focus on as well. And other than that, the customer will drive an opportunity for us. So if we have a multi-state opportunity with one client, and we start off with the best areas and the best market that drive the best returns or the highest lease rates for one of the C&I customers, but they may say, oh, by the way, I have 2 sites in Iowa, or I have 2 sites in Michigan. Is there anything you can do? And then we'll evaluate the opportunity, take a look. Maybe they want to do this for other than just saving money or creating new revenue streams for leasing out a roof. And they may want to do it for ESG reasons and kind of help just grow the industry. So we'll look at any opportunity in any state, try and provide the proper assessment and recommendation based on the customer's desires.
That makes sense. And that's really like all encompassing. And obviously it's scalable when you have that warm lead with the customer, right? And then looking at other markets with them. It's interesting because obviously New York community solar has been extremely successful. What about like early stage project development and with the queues and permitting and all the things that are taking a longer period of time? Has that been like a challenging situation? Obviously, it seems like markets are good at a certain time and then it gets saturated pretty quickly. Then it takes time, like, for example, the queues to clean up. Like, what's your perception of like the New York market going forward?
So luckily, New York has not had the slowdowns and delays with regards to the utility queues. I think they've had some setbacks in their ability to drive policy down into the individual markets. If you still have local decisions on a city by city or town by town level, where all of a sudden you've got one town supervisor that thinks solar is bad, and now you can't put solar in that town. And I don't think that should be the way that New York as a state approaches it. So I do feel like we've been slowed policy side, but not from a NYSERDA standpoint and not from a utility standpoint. Even though some things take longer than you want with the utility, typically they're getting done. It's not like a multi-year delay. So we've been working closely with both National Grid and NYSEG. And I think it goes hand in hand to helping them get better to understand like what's important to us in terms of timing and flexibility and moving projects through the queue. And then what's important to them for us to help them to make decisions to allow us to go faster. So really being prepared and having your stage B documents in the National Grid early, like as early as you can, which means some upfront investment in engineering. But if you could do those things, you can work well with the utility and move them faster than typically experienced. But that takes some cash and upfront development exposure to do.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great answer. And what about like to the complexities with Veeder and then potentially like how to forecast what the 25 years of the Veeder calculator would be, or even I've heard there's been situations where the Veeder model hasn't been the same as what the owner of the project expected. Like, has that been like, an issue within the whole process or?
Not really. I mean, I think there's a complexity around Veeder where you have, multiple different values that are adding up to one value stream and revenue stream. But I do think there's some consistency with the DRV being consistent for 10 years. I think that, capacity and energy costs are the one to the change, right? 2 years ago, there was a question of this duck curve and will so much solar come on and it's going to move capacity outside the window of the sun, and that's going to reduce the value of solar. And you've got the energy curves, and when you have really low gas prices, like, well, then you don't really need, you can have low energy prices. But then both those things turned around on their head. And 2 years ago, compared to today's curves, you're getting such more value out of the energy models that we're putting together. So getting tax equity and getting debt and getting long-term back leverage is much easier today than it was 2 years ago. That being said, anytime I've ever looked at a curve, what's the one common thing you could say about a curve that you look at? It's wrong and it's going to change. We always are conservative with the way we put our debt service coverage ratio and what we're willing to borrow against in terms of revenue, so we don't put the company in any type of a tough situation in the future. But I personally think the Veeder curve is a good solution, and more states should adopt similar type of approach.
Yeah, I think it is a great approach. And it's interesting because you mentioned California. They had like proposed legislation that was very similar to the New York community solar and the similar, I forgot what they called their Veeder program. But were you surprised like that the California PUC didn't move forward with the 7 gigawatt proposed community solar program in May? I know a lot of developers have been, down on California community solar, obviously, after that happened this year.
Honestly, we were surprised. I mean, I thought that was going to move forward. Thought they were progressive state and very solar supportive. We were investing, we were using our platform, we were finding sites, we were investing in opportunities near substations and leasing, putting options on leases for land. So we thought that was going to be a significant part of the growth for us for 2025. And it just turned out that it's not going to be any growth for 2025. We may have to look at when they come back around, look at 2026. I think to answer an earlier question, in terms of markets and utility changes, utility backlog, all of the things that slow down a developer and IPP, you have to be nimble. You have to have different market expertise. You have to be diversified, and you got to place some bets that aren't going to pay off immediately and try and get a longer term extension on those options. So if the market does come around, you're in a position to succeed in different spaces. So we'll keep a close eye on New York, California, Massachusetts, Maryland, and New Jersey, which are 5 major markets for us, and just continue to do that while we have 5 or 6 new emerging markets that we're investing in today for 2026, 2027, and beyond.
Yeah, definitely. That makes sense. And are you able to share like the future markets that you're focused on?
So there's probably 10 of them. People will argue which ones are going to succeed or not, but it's sort of up to your own discretion. But I would say Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, maybe Tennessee, New Mexico, Texas, Arizona. So just to name a few, those are some of the ones that we're looking at. And then I don't know about the Southeast with Georgia and Alabama and South Carolina, North Carolina. Those are all sort of trying to figure out what they're going to do as well. So, and Virginia is another one that's certainly looking to put community solar out there. So we'll keep an eye on all of them and looking at the policy and seeing where we want to make those investments.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting you mentioned that, you're not going to know. Like, this is actually interesting discussion to me is like developers really have to make bets on certain markets, right? Because you don't want to be late to the game, meaning we spoke about before, like if once a market's kind of clear cut, everyone just comes in at one time. So it's interesting that you mentioned about making bets on different markets and having site leases early on. So, I think that's a really smart strategy, or holding on or extending. You talked about extending site leases as well, right?
And I think the other piece of this is that development is very local, right? Having local developers in a market where they know what policies going on, they know the real estate, they know just the general environment. They know the local utility. So having a developer, smaller development shop that's not going to necessarily be a long-term holder in IPP is also part of our strategy. So as we go into these new markets, we look at the queue, who's developing opportunities, who's put interconnection applications in, and try and meet those local folks to give them the opportunity to potentially have like a developer services agreement with us where we could provide some capital for them, and then they can continue the development efforts without putting their own money in, but still get a development fee at the end of the day, and then teach us, about that local market. It also helps so we don't place a lot of really bad bets, and we could partner with people that are local that understand that geography.
Yeah, definitely. That makes a lot of sense. Obviously, partnering with local developers and learning. And as you mentioned, development is local and doing a co-development arrangement. That's really interesting. Also, I was going to ask you, are you doing like solar plus storage or standalone storage for both CNI and I guess distribution level projects?
So we do have an energy storage department. So we are putting energy storage. We have both AC coupled and DC coupled systems with solar, and depends on the market, depends on where we can derive value for us and for the customer. And then we also have a few standalone storage systems, predominantly in New York, because we know Veeder so well and we know Con Ed. We've got some sites that we're developing. Well, we've got operational sites and sites we're developing in the Con Ed territory where you could put 5 megawatt, 20 megawatt hour storage system and under the Veeder program, basically power that system. Typically it's midnight to 8 a.m. And then during the day, you can still dispatch, capture the Veeder DRV revenue. So that's a 4-hour window, 52 days a year from like middle of June to middle of September, as well as go after the capacity payments. It's a nice opportunity to generate some significant revenues and make slightly higher returns, actually, than some of the community solar projects we have upstate. For a similar investment, we're going to continue to pursue the opportunities with energy storage and continue to look at new markets. But I want to make sure that our business is fluid and efficient and operating at a scale that we can do the 200 megawatts of solar a year before we distract teammates to try and like pick up new projects and new opportunities. So we're going to stick to the states that we know, we're going to stick to technology we know, and we're going to build upon those successes.
Yeah. I know you talked about this a little bit earlier, but how do you think you've been able to amass a lot of megawatts in a short period of time? And then, with the goal of 200 megawatts, and I think you mentioned maybe 500 megawatts of 100 megawatts, I think you mentioned installed, 200 in construction, and then like a pipeline, a development pipeline. 'Cause that's not that easy to do, and to be able to scale something like that is pretty impressive.
Yeah. So again, I think a lot of it was the fact that we've got a really good network of people on our M&A team. We're out there looking at acquiring projects. Right today, there's a team of people up at the Albany at the Nicaea event. They're talking to developers, going to dinner, looking at portfolios, taking trips out to sites, doing the investigation using our software tools. We've got a really fine-tuned process at this point to look at the diligence of these projects. And it's 215 diligence items. We have a schedule for the time it's going to take. We have the expertise to look at these items. We have the option for the developer to log into the system and also put notes and highlight, the things that they think. If we've got questions, they could do Q&A right on the platform. We're very efficient at doing that. And we find that developers find that since I personally was a developer and sold projects to Catalyze and others, that I have the appreciation of the frustration that they go through of how things could take too long, or someone puts in some little fine-tuned gotcha into the contract. So if the system size changes or production changes or something, we're trying to get you. And that's not the case. We're trying to be fair on both sides. If production goes down, maybe you get a little less fee, but if production goes up, you'll get the benefit of that, right? So we could work together to make sure that you can extract the value of those projects you work so hard to develop. And I think the developers appreciate the fact that we have that perspective, and they continue to bring projects to us. And then they tell their developer friends, and then they tell their developer friends, and then boom, all of a sudden we've got a network of people looking to bring projects to us. So we've looked at over 1 gigawatt of projects this year and signed 225 megawatts of LOIs on the acquisition side while continuing to do our own internal development.
Oh, that's huge. That's a pretty high hit rate if you think about that. Like it's basically 12% or 1 out of 4, which is really high. So that's a kudos to obviously the team at Catalyze. And, I think you're right. Like developers feel like investors don't understand potentially like their sensitivities and being fair, obviously. And then, creating adjusters and upside or adjustments based on, expectations at the beginning of the project than what it actually was. That's really interesting for sure.
Yeah, exactly. We're way more flexible than some of these bigger utilities that have divisions inside the company that deals with the IPP side of the solar side. So I think people will experience that if they ever came to talk to us.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. And then obviously, this is 2 days after the presidential election. I guess has your expectations of like maybe like what was passed in the IRA or with President Trump coming back into office, does that change like how you look at renewables or how you're going to be strategic going forward? Or maybe there might be some impacts in the IRA. It would be interesting to get your perspective of being the CEO/COO of Catalyze.
Yeah, so I was way more nervous about the impacts President Trump would have on the solar industry in his first term. So he was pretty vocal about not supporting tax credits and solar and clean energy and all that stuff the first time. This time he's been much quieter about that. And if you look at the states that voted for him, they've benefited from solar. And then adding in the domestic content and tax credits for manufacturing and all of that, that's going to bring his big thing was we shouldn't be buying solar panels with tariff from China because of the tariffs. And, now having US manufacturing is going to create tons of jobs and tons of opportunities. So I'm really not that concerned that there's going to be any kind of major repeal of the IRA. I mean, there is maybe some subcomponents of the IRA, like around the whole EV. Like he's not so big behind EV charging and EV vehicles and all that to like force that issue. But I don't think the solar portion is going to go away or be repealed or be reduced in a very significant way. So I think he's just going to add more opportunity by putting more behind the economy. So I think we're going to get the positives on both sides, I think.
Definitely. I mean, that's actually great perspective. Like, I never thought about some of the things that you mentioned. And obviously, it's only been 2 days, right? We're all still kind of factoring it. And I think, too, like, we're probably going to see a lower interest rate environment than we have. And obviously, interest rates play a huge role in infrastructure projects, and that will allow in obviously more economic activity because that's really interesting perspective. Yeah. Just one thing that was really interesting to me was you mentioned obviously, when you first got into solar, it's all about sales, right? What your partner was saying, you could pick it up, you'll learn it. And obviously, Mercury Solar was extremely successful. What advice would you have for someone who wants to get into sales or maybe is in sales? Like, what advice could you give them? Because obviously, an experienced salesperson who's been extremely successful in what you've done in your career. What advice would you have for our listeners who we call Mavericks?
So what I would do if I were getting in an industry now, I would probably be willing to bet on myself, right? So go find a good solar company that is proven successful in a certain market. And I would go to them and say, look, I want to come on board and I'll take zero salary, pay me nice commissions and teach me how to do this, do some research in the beginning, but doing the job, getting involved right away, knowing you have to feed your family or have to feed yourself. That's kind of how I started. I had no salary. I was putting money into a business. I didn't know how to read my own utility bill. I didn't know what a watt or a megawatt or a kilowatt was. I didn't know what the difference of a kilowatt or kilowatt hour. So I figured all those things out, and I figured out that I NYSERDA incentives, and I figured out how to put a financial model together myself. So if you go to a company that has those things and that little bit of training ground, and you can get a mentor to help teach you some of that, I think you could be super successful because it's more persistence and knowing if you don't know something, don't be afraid to say, I don't know, but I'll get back. So I think that's what I would just bet on myself and go find a decent company that'd be willing to take a flyer on me.
Yeah, that is great advice. I really appreciate you providing that. I think, that's the best way to learn, right? When there's no salary and you don't get comfortable because you're forced to adapt, right? To be able to figure out how to sell. So I appreciate you providing that knowledge to our audience. Well, this has been an amazing interview, Jared. I really appreciate your time today. If people wanted to learn more about Catalyze or connect with you, like what's the best way for them to do that? And also like, it would be great too, like what types of companies or people that you're looking to network with, I think would also be helpful.
Sure. So I think, first of all, we're always looking for good people. As I just mentioned, we want to continue to build the company and look at new markets. So we're always looking at developing in new markets and partnering with developers in new markets. And then I guess finance partners. So there are people that want to put tax equity into an investment, or some of the banks out there that are looking to do sale leasebacks or provide construction finance and or long-term back leverage on a project. Those are the types of folks that we talk to in the industry. And you could find us at Catalyze, www.catalyze.com. So easy to contact us. Our emails are on there and we're not hiding.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll have that on the notes of the podcast as well. And I really appreciate it, Jared. This has been an amazing interview. Thank you for making time out of your schedule. And I'm excited to see the growth of Catalyze. It's amazing for me to see too. You know, I remember when you just got acquired by Catalyze, and then to kind of see your growth within the company in a short time, and then also to see how many megawatts that the company has acquired in a very short period of time. So congratulations. And I'm excited to see what the future holds for you.
Well, thanks. Thanks for having me. I hope to do it again someday when both of us are even in bigger positions.
Yeah, definitely. Onwards and upwards, of course. And I'm looking forward, hopefully doing another interview in the near future and talking about that growth for sure.
Sounds great. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Solar Maverick Podcast. The Solar Maverick Podcast is brought to you by Reneu Energy. We're a solar development and consulting firm. If you believe that this podcast is adding value to you, please give us a 5-star review and share with those that you think could benefit from this information. Please email all questions, suggestions, and feedback to info@reneuenergy.com. That's info@reneuenergy.com. The Solar Maverick Podcast is produced by Podcast Laundry and executive produced by Benoy Thanjan and Kevin Y. Brown.